Check out the Sustainability Expo Europe October 1st and 2nd in Amsterdam. Discover speaking sessions and panel discussions from Unilever, Kraft Heinz, Philip Erics, and more. Explore exhibitors showcasing innovative products and solutions and take advantage of networking opportunities. Use code SESustain20 at checkout for 20% off. And now it's going up. So, hey, everybody, welcome back to the Sustainiacs. I am Michael Vincent. I'm always the Sustainiac. She's Jennifer Faust. She's always a Sustainiac too, but this is her first time as a guest on the show. And welcome, Jennifer. I'm so glad that we finally got this together. We've been working on this for a number of months, right?
That's correct. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to finally be here after it took a few months for us to find a date that was going to work for us both.
Yeah, it did. And thank you for bearing with me with my illness yesterday. So I was not, or this week, it's strange. COVID is just coming around again, man.
It is.
I mean, I know more people who have COVID or have gotten COVID in the last 2 weeks than throughout the
Yeah.
lockdown years. Seriously.
Yes.
Which is interesting. It just and my entire family, everybody has had it. But anyways, that's not what we're here for. We're over that stuff. We're moving forward. Jennifer, it says here on LinkedIn when I stalk you, it says that you are an investment advisor at International Trade Center UN, which would be the United Nations, and Sustainability Impact Investment Advisor and board member as well.
That's correct.
Are these? So you're not. So are you? Is this the double-edged sword of Jennifer Faust that we're looking at?
Yeah, it is. I've kind of got it, I wear multiple hats.
Yeah.
And kind of there's two sides to the work that I do. One is with public sector clients, the largest being the International Trade Center, which is a joint UN WTO agency based in Geneva, Switzerland.
Right.
And we can go a little bit more into that specific work and where I focus on sustainable agriculture in the emerging market. And then there's the Faust Global Partners, LLC, really kind of the private client advisory work that I do. And that as well centers on ESG and sustainability, predominantly working with private equity clients who are trying to embed ESG and sustainability not only into their firm, but then across their portfolio companies and funds.
Oh, okay. So that's very interesting. I mean, both angles are very, very interesting. We can start wherever you want to. Let's talk about. I don't care. Well, let's start with the last one, I guess, the fund. So you're not directly investing in sustainable businesses, but you're helping firms who invest understand it better and make wiser decisions, I guess.
Yeah, I would say that is kind of predominantly the work that I do, with these private clients. I mean, I on my own, right, am an impact investor, and when I have, my own kind of portfolio, then I will
Yeah.
make some, venture capital, smaller investments into, up and coming businesses and sustainability. But the bulk of the work that I do, is with private clients. So they are private equity funds, some
Yeah.
venture capital funds I've worked with over the years, some microfinance funds, others that recognize, right, this, the emerging importance of sustainability and ESG into their businesses. Whether it's because management really feels passionately about it, but also, of course, because of the increase in regulation around the world, right? And the pressure that they're getting from investors and employees to integrate sustainability more into, their business practices. So I
Yeah.
serve as an ESG sustainability advisor to some private equity funds, helping them start building an internal ESG sustainability strategy for their firm. And then also integrating it across, their multiple funds and the portfolio companies that those funds have invested in.
I got you. So it's interesting because when you read the news and specifically, I mean you're right there in the heart of the incredible battles now that we have, which is completely ridiculous. I'm sure you agree. Everybody I talk to agrees that the battles are ridiculous. You're either way over here or way over there. None of us are in the middle, although all of us are in the middle. uh, right? But there are positive and negative influences that you have to have them guide through, right? I mean, it's not always positive for stakeholders or shareholders to see a firm investing in ESG, right? It's not always a positive thing, right?
Well, I think that there are some short term um, constraints, or you could say some short term, um, say this, kind of, it's not that it's short term risk, because it's short term, things you're giving up in order to put into practice, an ESG
Okay.
sustainability portfolio. So, I think one of the biggest things I work with clients on as they look at ESG and sustainability is really shifting their mindset from a short to a longer term horizon. And so you put in place some of these ESG and sustainability, practices and you could say frameworks into your business or to your fund. And yes, immediately there might be some costs, right? There might be
Yeah.
some upfront costs that are associated with it. But you have to then shift your thinking to more of a medium and a longer term, viewpoint. And I think in particular, that's a struggle in the United States, right? We're so hooked on, quarterly results of big public companies, stocks going up and down, all of that. I think parts of the rest of the world are a little bit better at looking at medium and long term. Um,
Yeah.
and so, yeah, you might take some hits to your bottom line,
Yeah.
in a 3 to 12 month period, or maybe even
Which
a
is
little.
forever in the US economy. That's forever. Three to
That's
12.
right?
It
That's
is.
forever.
Yeah.
People are not very patient here. And the
Yeah.
work I do is really global. So I see those types of cultural differences very clearly in how people perceive things. And so in the United States, they are. It's all about quarterly results. How are things going today? Is my bottom line increasing versus what it was last quarter or last month? And yeah, there is some short-term hits to ESG. However, I'm a firm believer, and I think there's enough evidence out there that in medium and long term, you're building a more sustainable business, and that in the long term, you're going to benefit from some of the work that you're doing today.
Yeah. There's those who would argue that if you left the American financial mind or mindset to its ways, it would build a car that went from 0 to 1,000 miles an hour in a quarter mile and blow up at the end.
Yeah,
Right. We don't understand the fact that you have to prune the tree to improve the fruit. Right. Sometimes that's what it is. Yeah, the patience is gone. Do you see in your work in that, I'm interested because I talked to several people. The last one was Peter Bryant. He's a mining and energy expert, right? He advises on mining operations and so on and so forth. But the thought really is that the sustainability of the ESG and the adoption or lack thereof in the United States, et cetera, is a detriment to really our competitive economy across the international. Do you see that? Is that a true statement to say?
I absolutely do. And I think I think it's going to impact our ability to compete internationally. I mean, you do not see the debate about ESG and sustainability um, as fiercely debated in the United States anywhere else in the world. And so what you're finding then is that other jurisdictions, other regions then are moving much quicker to putting into place different regulatory environments and frameworks for reporting and all of that. And that ultimately, those are going to be setting the stage. I think we're going to kind of show up a little late to the party, and the party's already, the table would have been set, and the food, the choice of food that night would have already been made. And
Yeah,
that's kind of the concern that I have, is that we're not more prevalent as the United States in making policy on this space. That meanwhile we're fighting politically, we have so much going on in this country here. There's such a divide and a politicalization of ESG and sustainability. And that debate's not happening other places as much. Sure, there's some debate about how to do it, but the concept of climate change, the concept of businesses needing to be a part of the solution, you ask your average person on the side of the street, they care much more about sustainability than what most Americans do. The other thing, of course, is that as global companies try to compete and go into, to new markets or even into existing markets, they're going to have to adhere to other countries' sustainability
Yeah.
requirements. And so I do think it's going to impact global competitiveness, and it is going to impact U.S. companies, whether they like it or not.
Yeah. So that's got to be difficult. I mean, for companies, I mean, it's almost like they're, the double-edged sword or the two sides of Jennifer Faust. You've got this, if you're a global company, right, you're playing in two different fields. Is there that big of a difference in them? That I would appear that there is. You've got to kind of pare it down to be able to compete with the Wild West of the United States, but also have the ESG at least reporting and things in place in order to deal with Europe and the rest of the world.
Right. And while compliance on a lot of like the European standards and other global standards are not immediate, they're phasing in, right? Even for European businesses,
Sure.
but the adherence to European standards, the reality is over the course of, let's just call it the next 3 to 5 years, there's going to be increasing regulation around this.
So wouldn't it make sense that if you're an international company, if you're a U.S. based company, that you just fully on embrace it, because it's got to be cheaper than I imagine this layer of intelligence that you have to have. That's just a capital suck trying to manage both sides of this, right?
Right. Right, absolutely. And I think what's going to happen then is, in order to reduce the demands, internal demands on a company or a firm and dealing with all these regulations and stuff, is I think you're just going to kind of set then your data course towards the most stringent. And then kind of, I know I'm talking with a lot of my clients about how can we create a process, an internal process, which pulls some of this ESG and sustainability data one time, right? And then you have it, and you're able then to apply it to whatever metrics that you need to apply to, right? Or whatever report you need to make. The one positive thing I think with respect to kind of the global reporting standard is that there's incredible consolidation that's taking place. And I
Hmm.
think there is an effort by a lot of regulatory, bodies around trying to kind of pick a few standards and then having people migrate to that. So I think ISSB, for example, is one that you're seeing great consolidation around, GRI and others. But you being able to create data, it's really almost it's a data collection, right? Of, I say, is, it's often in your CFO's office where you've been tracking, monitoring, and reporting on your financial data, and now it's adding a second layer of this non-financial data, grabbing
Yeah.
it once and then having all that data available in order to then kind of reply all the different reporting frameworks that you as a company have to deal with.
Yeah.
The other thing that I think is, you're going to see in the United States is kind of the this independent state actor, for example, like California. You're gonna, how is it, even if you have a company that says, we're not really actively engaged internationally, globally, okay, that's fine. But if you even have a strong domestic business, you're seeing variety, of regulations coming out of different states, right? California being a great example. So
Yeah.
if you're trying to sell in California, they have much greater restrictions in sustainability than other
Yeah.
US states.
I mean, that's the beauty and the difficulty of the United States, right? People don't understand that we're a republic of states, and therefore there's different laws. I mean, arguably, we're not technically really a country. We're a republic of states, right? And that's what makes it great in some instances, but really difficult to do business cross border in another. And like you said, it's difficult, or like we were discussing, to do business across and internationally sometimes because we have the ability to have these and do debate at length these different things. Let me ask you this: I've always had I believe in the argument that the sustainability efforts, ESG efforts, et cetera, are really, when you break them down, the really the core business values from business 101 that you should be employing anyways when you break them down. Is that too immature an argument to make, or do you agree kind of with that statement?
No, it's interesting, Michael. It's refreshing for me to hear you say that because that's also been my thinking too. You know,
Yeah.
and I've kind of been surprised by some of the more, negative voices in our country, about it is because as I interpret, what are just good, sound business practices, you know,
Right.
ESG kind of naturally comes to mind. If you break down, I mean, if you really take time to kind of go beyond, the names and say, all right, what does it really entail? You look at the E, you look at the S, and you look at the G. To me, it just kind of makes sense. I don't
It
think
really does, right? I mean, why wouldn't you, yeah, have these three, you know, verticals of government that have checks and balances, and right?
yeah, and if you are a business that is, hope you're building value and you've got kind of a strategic plan to be a business in place for the next 5, 10, 15 some years, right? You're not just kind of looking for, a 1 year window. I don't know why you wouldn't build that type of sustainability and resilience into your business. Um,
Yeah,
and so it can be a little bit surprising to me when I hear these, political arguments against it. And because I think ultimately putting many of these practices in place build a more sustainable business, which also too then will result in better financial results.
yeah. So there's two things that come to my mind when we talk about this particular subject, and one of them is, the romantic relationship with financial markets and the pressures there that kind of lead you astray from, if it turns a business into a moneymaker only, period, the end, right? And that's really not why you should be in business, in my opinion. If you're a business just to make a ton of money, then you need to rethink your life, in my
Yes.
personal opinion, right? And I think that's probably one of the pressures that make that happen. No.
No, I think it's true. I think and I agree with you. I share that same value. But I understand too the argument, the counter argument somebody would make, of course, is that the business exists in order to, create financial returns, right? That's
Yeah, but
prime.
that's not the only reason it's there, right? I mean, theoretically, it's not. That's not the only. There are institutions that do that, right? But I mean, you don't have if a pharmaceutical, and one would argue that maybe some of them are, were just to generate money. Maybe that's a bad example. I don't know, but you know what I'm talking about. You don't create a sustainable company to, or a recycling company or something, just to make a ton of money. There's some altruistic measure behind it, and maybe that should be a prerequisite to being allowed to get a business license. I
Yes.
don't know,
I,
but
I agree. I see your point on it, and I think so. I think again, I think the counter argument would be is that I'm going to use business in order to create a boatload of money, and then I'm going to take the profits, the spoils of my hard work, and then Johnny taxpayer, will decide how I am going to then give to different organizations and how I decide, I'm going to spend that money. It's that bifurcation of it.
yeah,
I
yeah,
think it's a bit outdated. I personally, I think life and work and, younger generations, I think that's a very pre-technology viewpoint of how life and work are completely bifurcated. I think things have changed and
yeah.
more and more people want to get a sense of pride and purpose out of their work than ever before. And, and I think embedding impact, sustainability, ESG is a way to help do that.
Yeah. Interesting. Interesting. Now, in your positions, in really in both, but probably, I'm guessing more so with the International Trade Center and the UN work, et cetera, you're exposed to and probably not by your own invitation at times, a lot of political pressures and international political pressures for what's going on. Do you see the argument that we were talking about? You have sides arguing for and against ESG. You've got the kind of the more conservative side at times, or Republican, if you want to say whatever you want to label it, say you can't have public funds investing in ESG companies and stuff like that, or if they have a specific attitude towards fossil fuels, I think was the actual term, right? Are these real feelings, or are some of them adopted just because the other side is for it? Therefore, we have to be against it. And we're not allowed to agree on a topic, even though it's the right way. We can't just reach across and say, Jennifer, we're of different political leanings, but your idea is great. Let's jump on board together because that's what we're really supposed to do. How much of it is really disagreement, and how much of it is just, hey, I can sway this amount of the population to feel negatively about this or positively?
Yeah, I think it's gotten really political. And I think you can always manipulate the message and data and other things in order to kind of support your cause. But
Yeah.
clear, one party here in the United States has really adopted the anti-ESG, anti-sustainability
Yeah.
message.
Sure.
And I think they have been a bit of an echo chamber to their constituents about this is, climate change isn't real. This is,
Yeah.
various things like that, and that this is woke. And so and they've done a great job actually at creating that narrative.
They really have.
They have. I mean, I have to give them credit for that. And I've even seen that in my business dealings with just friends and colleagues and stuff that I have, that I can tell some of them being more supportive of the work that I do, and others not, because it is in the ESG. What's
Right.
fascinating to me though is when I go abroad, and I do go abroad often, um, again, this political debate around sustainability, and I'd say sustainability is more the term people are starting to gravitate more and more to, because of this ESG politicalization. The reality is, very few, if any, dialogue is around the validity of sustainability. It's kind of interesting to me. You know, I,
Yeah.
I was recently in the Caribbean for an investment conference, and it was just on the heels of Hurricane Beryl that went through. I mean, you do not have to convince or debate anybody in other parts of the world that the impacts of climate change are real and are having a real impact, and a negative one, on other communities and countries. And so it's interesting to me as I travel internationally and am with different, you could say, levels of government, political leaders, business leaders in different countries, how different the discourse is in the United States versus other places around the world.
Yeah. It's really interesting. The other thing that I would say, and that's a great point that you're making, and I'm sure somebody has papers upon papers that they've written of why that is. I've never read them. If you know of any, I'd love to read them because it's interesting to me how it is. I've met a woman. She's vice president of sales at a company called Wally Grow. It's a really interesting company. They make a cool, sustainable planter that's kind of like a sconce you put on a wall. It's really kind of neat. But her conversion to sustainable thinking was she spent like 10 years as an English teacher in Heidelberg, Germany. And she came back and she just said it was a way of life. And when I came back here, it was really a shock to realize that we don't live this way.
Right.
Right. And she's got her theories as to why, and so do I. But it's really interesting that no matter how many people I talk to, that is, and it's not really. Some of it people say is because we've treated the global South as really our garbage can, whether they were welcoming it to recycling it or not. It's fact we did, and we
Right.
and we do still to some extent. And so you don't go to certain companies or countries or even Caribbean nations like you were talking about And when your broom handle breaks, you just go get a new one. There's a
Right.
new one. There's no Walmart down the road. You just don't get one. And some of that convenience factor's got to be part of it, but that convenience factor's in Europe too. It's not like Europe has got to, whittle a new handle for their broom if it breaks.
Right.
So
It's true. It's true. I think Americans, we like convenience, and I think we like to be comfortable. And I think this is what our lifestyle, of course, as a result, I think of, decades now really of success, right? And wealth and all of that. And, it's very apparent when I travel abroad. I'll give you kind of a recent example that I even found myself kind of having to, check myself and my attitudes and my behaviors. But when I was, down in the Caribbean last a few weeks ago, I was in Guyana, which is a South American
Mhm.
country right next to Venezuela, for an investment conference, and was there on behalf of the International Trade Center in the UN. And it was interesting because, I live here in the Washington, D.C. area, and admittedly live a pretty comfortable life.
Mhm.
And it's hot, it's in the summertime, and I get to live in the cool comfort of my 70, at least a 72-degree, temperature house
Yeah.
consistently, all those types of things. And then to pivot down to my hotel room in Guyana, which, had a small wall unit that, Michael, I couldn't even figure out how to turn that thing on half the time.
Yeah.
Had to call, UN colleagues in who are from Africa and a little bit more familiar with some of these challenges. And listen, I say I am no diva. I mean, I've traveled extensively around the world, but I slept at least one night with no air conditioning. And then they taught me how to use this thing. But it was very clear. They only turn on the air conditioning if and when you are actually in that room. And that was just a reflection of this whole entire week that I spent there, which is the vast majority of the meeting rooms I were in, even with top officials, were unair conditioned. And
Yeah.
and that country over the past few years has seen an enormous amount of wealth with the exploration of oil. But the lesson of it is they do not consume the level of energy that we consume. We are used to, in this country, convenience and comfort. And the minute we don't have one or two of those things, we're just unhappy and we kind of don't want to play ball as much, right?
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. It's crazy. It's crazy. So that attitude is certainly there, or that mindset, I should say. It's less of an attitude, I think, than it is really just a mindset of how we really just we do things. But have, do you see anybody who what confuses me at times is why okay, if you deny climate change or whatever, that's okay. Let's take that aside, right? I mean, people scream on it, people scream all kinds of stupid things on digital media, et cetera, right? You would think that since we can share information so much and so freely and so easily now that things would be better, but they're much worse. People are much more confused about reality now that they can see reality instantly. It's not reality anymore. We were more informed or more well informed, I think, when we only had three channels on the TV at times, I think. But why, what is the negative? What, why is it bad? Or what is the argument against trying not to, defecate in your own backyard? What's the argument against it?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Why, no, we don't need social or governance. We don't need we don't need the S and the G. What's the argument against it? I don't understand. Why isn't it better to promote ESG at all costs, regardless of what's going on in climate? If the climate's not changing, isn't it better to be able to swim in the Seine?
Right. I know. No, I know. And I think the messaging's been very distorted, and I think it confuses most people, right? That are tapping into the news here and there versus really kind of digging deeper and trying to understand the issues and stuff that There's an interconnectedness to the world, and whether your anti-ESGers want to acknowledge that or not. And so I think that's really what I look at and focus on is, what happens to our waterways impacts, of course, our food sources. Thinking through this interconnectedness of your life, not only with nature, but also, of course, even amongst, your neighbors within,
Yeah.
you're not only your neighborhood, but maybe your state, your country, and your region. And I think some of it can just be philosophical, right? Which is freedom, independence. I get to decide. Nobody gets to tell me what to do, type of a thing. But I think personally, I think it really fails to acknowledge, just I think a fundamental aspect of this world and this life, which is that we are interconnected and we need each other. No man
Yeah.
is an island. And so, but that's my philosophical perspective on it.
Right.
And I feel like I could go on and on with different, justifications for that philosophical argument. But, and again, we're here to make, a business is a for-profit entity. I'm here to make business, to make money the best way that I possibly can.
Yeah.
And that means paying people as little as possible. That means, using the resources that I have, however I can, and dumping and throwing away or whatever it is, in order to make that type of profit. But again, I think it's just such a short-sighted and viewpoint of life and of business.
Yeah, no, it really is, and I mean, one of my favorites was, and I quote him often, was Alfred North Whitehead, and I loved reading his adventures and ideas and many different things that he wrote. The old Columbia University business professor, but he said that a society is only as great as the importance its men and women of business place on their contributions towards that society, right? And I quote that a lot, people ad nauseum, because I believe it's true. If there isn't a purpose to your business and you don't hold on to that purpose, then I really don't see your purpose. And that's all over the place. I mean, it's really interesting. Do you think part of it is the denial or the arguments are based on like a denial, on a hysterical denial, like a trauma almost, right? Like you're denying that this is really happening to make yourself feel better. So the more you read the content looking for validation of that argument, and there's somebody out there providing it, so you consume it,
Right.
right?
No, I mean, and if you're getting your news source from one place, you know what I mean? And I think if you're limiting your viewpoint, where you're sourcing, I think you continue to hear messaging, right? Which, you know, discredits climate change or discredits all of this. So yes, I mean, absolutely. And I think then it creates, some responsibility on your part, to make a change, some ownership, which is always hard. I think, people have different levels of comfortability around change. And I think certainly we have, there are changes that are going to need to be put in place in order, I think, to address climate change. And I think not everybody wants to change those habits, change those patterns in their life, and would much rather just kind of allow somebody else to have to do it for them, right? Or a younger generation to take on that ownership of it. Again, I think it goes down to this lack of a collective responsibility. I think if you look back at business 150, 200 years ago, it was much more community, based, right?
Yeah,
I mean, and maybe it's as well one of the negative impacts with globalization is that you're right. You have these distributed supply chains, various things. It's much easier. You're not sitting looking at the problem in your face, and you feel less
yeah,
connected to it, which is why I think with sustainability and ESG, storytelling is really, really important. I think connecting people with the impact, connecting people with the global South. You're right. I see it too. We've dumped a lot of our waste onto the global South. Most people don't recognize who makes your clothing. When you have these fractured supply chains, it pulls you further and further away from people in the end product. And I think that over time, since globalization really boomed post World War II, I think is creating a separation between people.
Yeah, it certainly is. So, um, the work that you're doing at the International Trade Center and the UN World Trade Organization, et cetera, across the globe, is that more mission based? Is that more dealing with societies and building infrastructure, et cetera, than direct private enterprise and that type of thing?
Absolutely. I mean, everything that the ITC does, with it being part of the United Nations, has an impact lens attached to it.
Yeah.
And so sustainability, resilience, and the agribusiness space is really core to the work that we do. So
Okay.
it's across some of your key agriculture value chains, your cocoa, your coffee, your coconuts, and a variety of things, spices and stuff, all the way down to fresh vegetables. But and then not only we work with farmer organizations and cooperatives, but it goes all the way up what is kind of considered the value chain of agriculture. I think again separating your consumer with your producer. I don't think consumers understand the number of the value chain steps that a product goes through from when it's
Mm,
actually produced, often in places like the global South, right? And when they all
yeah.
of a sudden you go and pour a cup of coffee in the morning.
Yeah, or tea that I'm having right now. Yeah, absolutely, they don't. So, is a lot of the work around that, like you talk about the infrastructure of supply chains and logistics, is that really because I've had that argument. My argument is, and I've 36 years in logistics. Now I'm in recycling, et cetera. And my thought was, and I still argue it, is it's the supply chain, it's the logistics that need to be fixed.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I do. I think supply chains are a key component of addressing sustainability. Um,
Yeah,
and so I think you cannot talk credibly about sustainability with not looking at your supply chains and your sourcing, and of course, too, is part of that as well. Transportation. I mean, it goes all the way through.
sure.
And So I think all of that is a key component
Yeah.
of it.
Well, you mentioned the different steps in the the division of the value chain, and condensing that value chain is what it helps, right? I mean, all right. Sorry about that speed bump.
Problem, not a
Our
problem.
supply chain was interrupted briefly.
Right.
Uh, but I was asking about condensing the value chain, and if that is really when you talk about the supply chain, it's so fragmented in specific areas. And what I meant by that, if people don't understand what the question, the base of my question is, sustainability and the movement towards it, whether it be alternative energies or your work in agriculture, et cetera, we have the opportunity to, I'm not going to say redistribute, but to uplift a lot of communities,
Right.
right? And kind of improve the value chain for everybody across the board, which we could have done with oil and we could have done so many times, but we failed to do it. Is this our opportunity to do that again?
I think,
Maybe?
yeah, I think sustainability, I think this is, and I think about my children and others, I think this area broadly is going to be one of the big opportunities going forward for multiple decades, right? How do we build more sustainable products and services and businesses and all of that? And I think it's a great opportunity to truly uplift more, and to create greater value not just for a few at the top, but for more people. And I think, as you hear in politics too, of course, with the US election, everybody talking about, the middle class, all of that.
Yeah.
I think in particular, I think of the S of ESG. I think it's a great opportunity to address some of the S issues, which I could have a huge impact on the middle class and opportunities that they have. I think of the S with training, development, those types of things, which could be really interesting and allow people greater mobility and better jobs and stuff. So, um,
Yeah.
you know, I I think it's all very much so connected, and I see it as an opportunity, not so, I know there's of course great risk that comes with climate change and worries around it. You see that with the insurance industry and others, but I see it as an opportunity too.
Yeah. Fantastic. That's my thoughts. If you've got a last thought other than that, which I thought was pretty good, let's hear it, because I mean, there, you mean, look, 45 minutes goes by.
It
Boom.
does, doesn't it? I know.
I got so many more things I'd love to discuss with you.
I think, just kind of one final point is something that is on my mind with respect to sustainability is, you see the larger, big publicly listed companies, are building out sustainability teams. They're much more focused on it. They're listed. They have greater reporting requirements and responsibilities. What I think is going to be is an interesting space, and a space that I really am focused on is that SME space. Um,
Mm,
is that I think for sustainability, and in particular in the United States, to truly gain traction, that is where we need to normalize it. That's where we need to go. And so it's not surprising that a company based in New York City is buying into sustainability. I want to see a company in Topeka, Kansas buying into it. I want
yeah.
to see
Yeah.
it broad based. And I think that's where I like to spend time working with clients, and particularly focused on that SME space, or private equity firms that are more focused on middle market companies, because that's where I think you can have some really great impact.
Gotcha.
And I really want to see sustainability become more mainstream into modern American thinking. So
Yeah.
that's kind of a focus of mine, a wish of mine. And I think it's not going to be until that happens that we are going to kind of truly adopt it, right? Most of the American economy is driven by SMEs. That's true for, most economies around the world. So
Sure.
how can we mainstream this more into SMEs? And have it be more broadly accepted across the United States. So that's something on my mind, as I move forward in this space.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jennifer. I mean, follow Jennifer on LinkedIn. I do, and that's where I found her, and she's awesome. Look, what is it? What's the website for the work that you're doing at both places that people can go to and see what's
Right.
going on?
Yeah, I appreciate that. So my personal website for Faust Global Partners is, www.faustglobalpartners.com. The work that the ITC does, the International Trade Center, you can Google it, and it's intrasend.org. And you can see all the great work that the ITC is doing. It's based in Geneva. It's been focused 60 years on small and medium sized businesses across the emerging market. The program that I advise for is just one of really cool projects that they're working on, focused on sustainability. So join us.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Peace and love to you, and peace and love to everybody out there. Thank you for downloading and listening.
Bye, Michael. Best wishes.